and Sanctuary with Emma Newman. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to episode 6, season 2 of Tea and Sanctuary. It's okay, you're safe now. We're just going to sit together, or if you're out for a walk somewhere, be together for the next half hour or so, talking about very gentle things that are hopefully not stressful, thought-provoking in the nicest way, and give you some solace and calm in these interesting times that we live in. So what am I going to talk about today? Okay, well, the first thing that just randomly popped into my head, I don't know why I make notes for these episodes anymore because I just can't stick to them, it seems. I saw a picture online of an 80s lunchbox and had the most powerful sensory memory of my childhood. It's just incredible. I saw this picture and it was a Star Wars lunchbox, which I always wanted and never had, but one of my friends had one. But the thing that really came back to me was the feel of that particular plastic and the sound of it opening and closing again, and just the dimensions of it. Like, I've got such intense memories physically of the lunchboxes that I have owned. So I think when I was very, very young, I had a My Little Pony one, but I don't remember that very well. The one that I really remember was my She-Ra one, because I loved that. I loved it so much. Good grief. Oh, just a vehicle for selling toys. But no, I loved it. I loved that. I loved it so much that I wanted it on a lunchbox. So that was my lunchbox for some time. And then I had a Batman one much later in the 90s. The Batman animated series. I went and bought it for myself, even though I wasn't at primary school anymore, even though I didn't have packed lunches at school anymore. I needed to have it because I really loved, and still do love, though I haven't seen it for years, the Batman animated series. Very sad that Kevin Conroy died. I was at an event that he was at some years ago. I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been some kind of Comic-Con in London. I don't remember which one. And it was in the green room, and I saw him and I was too shy to go and say hello, which is frustrating. Ah, the joys of being shy. But that memory of lunchboxes, in particular the She-Ra one, also extends to the particular smell of sandwiches after they've been in one of those lunchboxes on a hot day. And how they're kind of warm and soggy. Oh dear. How strange, how powerful that memory was. If you were here, I would ask you, if you were in this room with me now, I would ask you if you had one of those lunchboxes. You know the ones I mean, like the I think they were slightly rectangular, but the actual, and they often had a thermos inside. I don't know if the entire lunchbox was it wasn't insulated, but the brand thermos or not, I'm not sure. I don't know if mine was a thermos one. It might have been a cheap knockoff. But yeah, I think that they had like these thick cups inside. They certainly never kept my drinks cool. I remember that. Yeah. Wow. Funny what you remember, isn't it? I can remember a particular t-shirt from when I was about 5 that had a picture of like this fluffy cartoon. I think it was a dog or a bear, I can't remember. And it was one of those t-shirts where the design was like plastic that had been ironed onto the t-shirt. And I can remember the feeling of that transfer on the t-shirt really powerfully. Ugh, memory. It's weird. Okay, so what else am I going to talk about today? No, right, okay, I know. The time has come, my lovelies, for me to talk about one of my greatest passions, because somebody I mentioned this in the Advent calendar, and somebody actually took the time to send me an email saying, yes, please do talk about this because I would love to hear it. So I have permission from one listener, and that's all I need, to talk about disaster movies. I think if I was ever going to go on Mastermind or something like that, I might pick it as my specialist subject. Though actually that would be stupid. It should be Star Trek The Next Generation, because I would actually be able to have a chance at knowing some of the answers. But the sheer amount of love and passion that I have for this genre is quite unusual. And when I think about it too hard, it makes me feel slightly uncomfortable. Like, do you do this sometimes where you can be in a thing and you're really enjoying it, and then suddenly you kind of pop out of it and go, human beings are really weird? Like, sometimes I have that at LARP. It's almost like an out-of-body experience where I'm very in something and then I just go pop and look at it from the outside in and think, good grief, what are these ridiculous human beings doing? Why do we like this? And I had that with disaster movies the other day and thinking, there are real world disasters that happen that are really distressing and appalling, that are lived experiences, that are incredibly traumatic, that you would never wish upon anybody. And yet, there are also movies of disasters, which is an entire genre of its own, that is an incredibly popular genre, that you sit down and watch of an evening for entertainment. What is that about? So I feel a bit weird talking about it, because in some way I think that that's a bit strange. I'm going to try and get out of my own head about it though. So, why do I love disaster movies? I have no idea. I have this pet theory that because I'm chronically anxious, whether that's because of the autism or just anxiety or whatever, I often wonder if there's some part of my brain that is almost practicing. There have been a few occasions in my life where a genuine emergency has happened, or something just really awful has happened, and that's when I'm calmest. I'm super calm. Not every single time. I'm thinking of a couple of times where I have actually freaked out a little bit. But things that I thought I would be utterly unable to deal with, I've been super calm. I was always worried when I had my son that when he got to the age where he was going to go out and play and fall over, that I wouldn't be able to handle a skinned knee or a badly cut knee or any other kind of injury, because I have fainted at the sight of my own blood on several occasions and I'm quite squeamish. But the first time it happened, and it was a real corker of a cut knee, I was so calm. It was absolutely fine. It was horrible in terms of, my child being distressed, but I was so calm and collected, and I was quite shocked. So I wonder with disaster movies if there's some part of me that's almost like learning about it so that I would know what to do and what not to do. That sounds really childish and silly, doesn't it? But I don't think I mean it that way. I don't think it is childish. I wonder if part of this is a bit of autism on my part, because I'm very aware that I often watch TV shows and films, and it's almost like I'm studying the interactions between people. Does that make sense? It's almost like it's a way of learning about the world. And I'm very aware that it is ridiculous data to use because it's fiction, it's stylized, it's theatrical, it's not realistic. But I think that there is some element of making the world just that little bit less scary because I've seen it in some way. I don't know. The disaster movie I want to talk about today is Dante's Peak, which is, in my mind, the platonic ideal of a disaster movie. It is perfect. And I will fight you. Now, I say it's perfect in the full knowledge that it has some of the worst Hollywood science ever committed to film within it. It is utterly absurd and incorrect and unrealistic in so many of the set pieces that happen post-eruption in this movie. When I say that it's perfect, I mean that it adheres to the rules of disaster movies beautifully, but not only that, it does that without falling into some of the toxic things that are portrayed in other disaster movies. So I should qualify that, shouldn't I, with an example. So in Dante's Peak, if you haven't seen this movie, and please do go and watch it if you're able to after listening to this, this is a film from the 90s. Good grief, I think it was the late 90s, 97 or 99, I don't remember which. 97, I think. I can't remember. And it stars Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton. And Hamilton is a small town mayor, and the town that she's mayor of is at the foot of a previously dormant volcano. And Pierce Brosnan is a geologist who specialises in volcanoes. I was going to say volcanologist then, but then I was worried I'd got something mixed up with the Star Trek bit of my brain. And I can't remember in this moment whether that's the correct term or not. But anyway, he specialises in volcanoes, and his fiancée, this is told in the opening credits sequence, some years before, like 4 years before, was killed in a volcanic eruption. And ever since then, he's just been focusing on his work. It's the traditional hero in lots of disaster movies, often the guy, because let's face it, it always is. And he either has an estranged family or very difficult family relationships because he is utterly obsessed with his work. So ding, that's one tick in the box, that trope. And the reason I pause is because I'm thinking of all of the other disaster movies I've seen and like running through them in my head and going, is that the same? Obviously, tropes don't mean that every single one follows it, but a large number do. And he is called to go to Dante's Peak, which is this town, because there have been some rumblings from the volcano, and he is convinced that there's going to be an eruption, and his boss sends the team out there, and the boss goes with them to do investigations. And Brosnan's character is, it's going to be an eruption very, very soon, and the boss is downplaying it because that's another great trope. Expert says something terrible is going to happen. The boss or the person holding the purse strings says, no, it definitely isn't. And so hundreds, sometimes thousands of lives are put at risk because nobody listened to the expert. It's another favourite trope of mine. But the thing that I mean about this film honouring tropes but not falling into the toxic stuff is that the thing that I really love about Dante's Peak is that the scientists go there, gather loads of data, and legitimately disagree on what it shows. And it isn't anything to do with cost cutting or a corporation wanting to make wild profits and thereby endangering the safety of the people who are in the building. Looking at you, Towering Inferno. And that's what I mean by that toxic element, that there's like lots of really horrible conflict. There is conflict in Dante's Peak, but it's scientific conflict. It's about the interpretation of results. And what the film does really elegantly is it sets up the doubt in the mind of the audience about whether Brosnan's character is being overcautious because he lost his fiancée in an explosion in the past that they underestimated. And in eruption, rather, that they underestimated. And so you, as the audience, have been set up to think, well, maybe he is overreacting a little bit. Maybe he is being overcautious because he's deeply traumatized. But the thing that I really particularly love about Dante's Peak apart from all of the utter ridiculousness, apart from all of the ways that it includes all of the best tropes, because there are so many that I haven't covered already, is the fact that Pierce Brosnan's character is such a positive portrayal of masculinity. He is passionate, he is forthright, but he is also very gentle and is great with her kids, because she's Linda Hamilton's character's kids are from a previous relationship and they were effectively abandoned by the father. And Hamilton's character is great as well. She is a mayor, she runs a coffee shop, she's a single parent, and she is doing her best and is lovely. And they're just lovely, wholesome characters. The kids are really annoying at certain points because they do stupid things, but they're plausible things and they're not actually too awful. And they support each other. And there is a wholesomeness in that film which you don't see in a lot of other disaster movies. They genuinely love each other and care for each other and are really good in the way that they help each other through the crisis. Yes, you see that in other movies, but not all of them. And what was the other thing that I wanted to say about Dante's Peak? And it's flown out of my funnel. Sorry, that's an expression. Back when my son was very small, he loved Thomas the Tank Engine. And I think in one of the episodes, it expressed the idea of having an idea. I didn't say that very well, did I? It had something where having an idea was something that flew into Thomas's funnel. Or that was I can't remember what exactly it was. And for years, the phrase in our household was that if you have an idea, it's something's flown into your funnel. And if you forget something, it's flown out of your funnel. Sorry. So you did not need to know that. Or maybe you did, just to explain why I say something so stupid. But anyway, the other thing that I really love about this movie is the science team. That they are all nerdy, lovely people. They have a robot that they get annoyed at, that they talk to like it's a dog. It's all sweet and wholesome. And the trope of the person who disbelieves the expert and says, no, that disaster is not going to happen, always has to die, right? That's the rule in a disaster movie. The thing I really like about this movie is that the guy who was saying, no, the volcano isn't going to erupt, is sensible and plausible. And when he realizes that he's interpreted the data, not incorrectly, but that it did something unexpected, he is openly sorry and says, look, I called this wrong. I'm really sorry. He does everything right. Up until that point, you can argue that he is still doing everything right. It's just a disagreement. And so when he dies in this movie, it's genuinely sad. And I like that it's that emphasis rather than in other disaster movies when that person dies, it's almost like a, yeah, serves you right. Which is not the kind of thing that I really like to be brought out in me watching it. It really helps that the chemistry between Brosnan and Hamilton is really good, I think. But I really love Brosnan's character. He's really brave and capable. He's a proper movie hero, but he is also softer than a lot of movie heroes. And I think a very, very positive portrayal of masculinity. But also, I'm sorry, the whole acid lake scene is actually unforgivable. Scientifically speaking. It's great drama though, and it's great atmosphere and tragedy, so I forgive it. You know, we overlook those things. We overlook the driving over lava. I just laugh when those scenes happen. Yes, let's drive over the lava and not die. It is, as I say, utterly ridiculous, but as a movie, I adore it. And it is one of the rules in my life that if I am away somewhere or it just happens to be on, I have to sit and watch it. It's one of those movies. I have seen it dozens of times. It's one of my comfort movies, and I feel really strange saying that. It's like, yes, I'd like to watch a volcano erupting. It makes me feel safe and comfortable, but it does. It does. I'm not going to apologise for who I am. Before I go any further, here's a big thank you to my gorgeous patrons for keeping the teapot full and for helping me to keep my podcast ad-free. If you'd like to join them to get ad-free versions of these podcast videos, go to patreon.com/Emma Newman. If you'd just like to buy me a nice cup of tea, go to ko-fi.com/Emma Newman. Thank you. So yes, that's one of my favourites. I have many opinions about many other disaster movies. I have seen, I think, all of the major ones and some obscure ones as well. This actually, I'm going to go off on a tiny tangent and talk about something which is kind of an apocalyptic movie. It's not strictly speaking a disaster movie because it doesn't fall within the structure and tropes of a disaster movie. And this is a film that I think is from the 60s, and it's called The Day the Earth Caught Fire. And if you ever have the chance to watch that movie, please do. It is excellent. I saw it many, 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 many years ago when I was a kid, and I loved it. And then I had the opportunity to watch it again. It was being shown late at a convention. There was, good grief, I can't even remember which convention that was. This was years ago. And I saw that it was on the programme, and I thought, it was a really late night showing, and I thought I'll go and watch that to kind of wind down. I think it was in the States. I can't remember. Anyway, it's so good. It still stands up. The script is really good, really sharp and witty. And the impending disaster is just done so well. I love that film. So yes, it's kind of adjacent to disaster movies. But I also really recommend that. The only disaster movies I have not seen, well, one is a TV series, is Threads, and The Day After. The Day After, I think, was American, and Threads is British. And they're about nuclear holocaust. And Threads is genuinely one of the most traumatic, terrifying things ever made. And as is widely said online, lots of people say if you have power in the world, and you in particular have power over nuclear weapons, you should be forced to watch that in its entirety, because it is so harrowing. I have never seen it all the way through. I've only managed to get part way through the first episode, and it always gives me horrific nightmares. I grew up in the 80s, and so, yeah, the threat of nuclear war was something that has really gone deep in terms of the trauma fibres. This is a sanctuary, Em. Stop talking about that. But it's the only disaster movies that I haven't seen, or disaster shows that I haven't seen, because it's just too distressing. Dante's Peak is not remotely distressing in the way that those are, though. So if, like me, you like disaster movies, but also like me, you are a little anxious soul and you find things difficult, that's a good one to go for if you want to dip into the genre. I also have a great love of the movie Meteor, which is from the 60s. Just because it has a couple of lines in it which are really funny. And it's just so utterly ridiculous. It's such a strange movie. That's about obviously a meteor that's going to hit the Earth, and it's got Sean Connery and I can't remember the name of the actress who's in it. I really like her. Oh, good grief, what's her name? See, it's names again, isn't it? I'm terrible. Doesn't matter. But the thing that I really love about that movie is the utterly ridiculous shots where it cuts to the meteor slowly hurtling towards Earth and this ridiculous music that plays. It's so cheesy and so great. I love it so much. Yeah, that is just pure cheesy joy. Right, I'm gonna pause there. I may return to other disaster movies in the future. It's one of my special interests, shall we say. I really enjoy it. Okay, what else am I going to talk about? Um, I'm going to stay with movie stroke TV show stuff with a theme. Um, a few weeks ago, I really, really wanted to watch. I was trying to decide with my housemate because occasionally we'll watch movies together. And I said, the thing that I really, really want to watch is my ultimate comfort movie. I was very stressed at the time and in need of utmost comfort. And I almost found myself kind of embarrassed to say that I wanted to watch it, but they were like, no, what is it? What is it? And it's The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. And it was made, I think, is it 1937? It's either 36, 37 or 38. Well, that doesn't narrow it down. But it was made in the late 30s, 1930s. Good grief, it's, like 90 odd years old. Blimey. Time. Anyway. Wow, that is, I don't know why I've only just started to appreciate just how old that movie is. It's a bit like people saying, back in the 90s, and your brain thinks that was 10 years ago, and it really was not. Anyway, let's stay focused. This movie is one of my all-time comfort movies because when I was a kid, I was very, very, very close to my late paternal grandfather. And he lived in Bury, just north of Manchester. And in the 80s, he used to drive from Bury all the way down to deepest, darkest Cornwall, where I was born and grew up. And back then it was probably like an 8-hour journey, because various motorways and dual carriageways that exist now didn't exist then. And he used to drive all the way down to Cornwall to pick me up, to drive me all the way back up to Bury, so that I could spend big chunks of my summer holidays with him. And I used to go there for Christmas as well. And every time I went to Grandad's after this incredibly long car journey, which I didn't mind at all because I was with my granddad and I loved it. As soon as we got back to Bury, we'd go to the Mile Lane Chippy, which was down the road, and we would have pudding and chips. And by pudding, I'm talking about northern pudding. So it's like a very thick, dense suet pastry with steak and kidney filling in like a very rich sauce. Oh, they're divine. They are so tasty. They've got the most comforting, dense feeling to them. I just can't describe how good they are. Oh, I really want one now. I think it was Holland's puddings. And yeah, it's a very particular brand of pudding. And chips, and Grandad used to have peas, but I didn't like those. So pudding and chips, it didn't matter if it was like 11 o'clock at night. We'd go and get pudding and chips from the Mile Lane Chippy. And then we would go to Grandad's. And no matter what time it was, he'd say, well, which one do you want to watch then, love? And I would watch either the 10 Commandments, the Charlton Heston, absolutely terrible movie, but again, really love that movie because of the time, or Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood. And more times than not, it would be The Adventures of Robin Hood, which my granddad had taped off the telly on this ancient VHS cassette. And we'd watched it so many times that it had slightly stretched in places. And it had like little crackles at the edges. I loved that movie so much, and I still do. I still utterly adore it. And managed to find it on DVD many, 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 many years later. And every time I'm missing my granddad, or if I'm really stressed, or I really need some comfort, that's the movie I reach for. But I've never watched it with anybody else other than my granddad. And It's so old and it's so twee and schmaltzy, I guess you would say, that I was convinced that my housemate would think it was terrible. But they were kind and said, no, let's watch that. You need to watch that. And watching it with somebody else, I was aware that I couldn't objectively say whether this movie was good or bad because it is its own thing for me. It is such an important experience. I can't objectively evaluate whether it is a good movie or not. But watching it with my friend, we actually sat down together afterwards and talked about it and like dissected it and concluded that it's actually a really great movie. it's really well paced and enjoyable. The character of Robin Hood is exactly what you want from a quintessential Robin Hood character. Olivia de Havilland, her maid Marian, is brave, comes up with the plan to rescue him from being hanged, is imprisoned herself for trying to warn him about the plot against King Richard. And, you know, she has agency. She's important. And it's just wholesome as... I'm trying not to swear on this podcast. But yeah, it's so wholesome. And in glorious true Technicolor. It is so brightly coloured and oversaturated. And the music is great. And I found out later that the soundtrack won an Oscar, which I didn't know. It's just so cute. And it contains everything that I genuinely want from a Robin Hood story. And it led us to talking about different portrayals of Robin Hood. And so we went on this kind of several week-long research binge, because we're both nerds, where we like went and sought out all of the other Robin Hoods that we could find. So we ended up watching Kevin Costner's Prince of Thieves. Good grief, that's a terrible movie. I loved that when I was a kid and went to see it at the cinema. It's objectively terrible. I love Morgan Freeman in it. He's the best thing in the movie. Morgan Freeman and the Little John in that movie. I liked him. And of course, Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman is in a completely different movie to everyone else. And I love him for it. It was just the most ridiculous role. And tonally completely divorced from whatever Kevin Costner was trying to do. So it was fun watching that. We watched another one, which I think was from the 90s, just called Robin Hood, which had Uma Thurman as Maid Marian. Good grief, that was appallingly bad. So bad. And then we dug up Robin of Sherwood, which is a TV show from the 80s that I had the vaguest memories of. And we're slowly working our way through that. And that is very patchy. There have been a couple of episodes that have been genuinely fantastic. But my goodness, I won't go into all of the reasons why it's terrible, because I like to be positive about things. The merry men and the scenes they have in the forest there are 3 seasons, and we're about halfway through season 3. But the scenes with the merry men and Marian training and messing about together are just gorgeous, and I love them. But there are so many things that are just so bad about that show. And it's one of those shows as well that people have a deep love for, because I remember when I was a kid loving it, but I couldn't remember the show. So it's very of its time, let's put it that way. But what was really interesting was that in so many of these portrayals, especially like the 90s movies, the Robin Hood characters didn't do what Robin Hood is supposed to do in any meaningful way, i.e. steal from the rich to give to the poor. For some reason, there was this period in the 90s where that was really unfashionable. Didn't really like that at all. Really strange. Like Kevin Costner's Robin Hood at one point has got this like treehouse filled with gold that they've taken. At no point is it redistributed to the poor. They kind of hint that he's given them sanctuary by helping them to build this like treehouse place in Sherwood Forest. But that's not the Robin Hood myth that I grew up loving, and no. But the Errol Flynn version does have that. He takes from the rich, he distributes to the poor, he actually fights the injustices being done against the Saxons. Like, there are several scenes where there are Normans like beating people or, you know, dragging them off for not paying their taxes, and Robin Hood literally going and murdering them just to protect the people, and all this, like, actual direct action. And yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating watching the different ways that all of these different versions have shown that. Oh, and of course, how could I forget the Disney Robin Hood, which I think I saw when I was very small and I couldn't remember it. So watching it recently was like watching it for the first time. And I know that loads of people absolutely love it. I think the pacing was very strange, and it was obviously low budget because there were bits of the animation that were exactly the same as animation I'd seen in other Disney movies. It was like they'd reskinned them. But at least Robin Hood does actually, you know, redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor in that movie. So yeah, it's been this weird kind of almost like research project on the different ways that Robin Hood has been portrayed. If you have a favourite portrayal, let me know, because I would be interested to see other interpretations of the myth. There was a really old Sean Connery movie which was like Robin Hood years later. I think it might be Katharine Hepburn, that was like an older Marion, which I must try and hunt down. I can't remember that very well at all, whether it was good or bad or not. But yeah, the 1930s version. The other thing I really love about really old movies, I don't know why I say really old movies, it's all movies. The thing I love about all movies that are set in historical periods is the way that you see a varying level of historical accuracy in the costumes, but always, always the fashion of the time being reflected somewhere, whether it's in the makeup, it's often the makeup, or the hairstyles, or the cut of the gowns. And the thing that I find endlessly fascinating about Maid Marian's gowns in the 1930s Adventures of Robin Hood is that in some ways the line is perfect, but the necklines are very 1930s in places, and also the fabrics, like these lame fabrics. Things that are just really, really very not historically accurate at all, but it's still better than some modern movies. But like, hilariously, the costumes of like Robin Hood and the Merry Men, they look like ballet costumes. It's so weird. So weird. But I love in all of these movies how you see the fashions of the time reflected in the way that, because obviously filmmakers want modern audiences to think that the stars look beautiful and amazing regardless of the time period of the movie. It's really fascinating to me. Anyway, that's enough random burbling from me. Now I really want to have pudding and chips from Mile Lane Chippy. I don't even know if it's there anymore. Haven't been back that way for years. It's too painful, him not being there. But if you live in Bury, and if you know whether Mile Lane Chippy is still there, and if it is still there, please go and have pudding and chips for me. Certainly, over 30 years ago, that was the best chippy. Can't speak for it now, because I haven't been there for literally decades. Probably isn't there anymore. But yes, if there is a chippy near you that does pudding, chips and gravy, good Lord. Did I forget to mention the gravy? The gravy is the most important part. Yeah, that was the thing I always loved about going to Grandad's, is that chippies served gravy, which they didn't down in the southwest. And I remember one of the first times I went to a chippy in Oxford, when I lived in Oxford, and I was looking at the board and the bloke said, "Is there something you're looking for?" And I was like, "Well, where's the gravy?" And he just looked at me like, Gravy? This is a fish and chip shop. Oh dear. I think it's a little bit more common now. I think that good influence of the north has spread. Maybe there are some terrible places very far south where you can't get gravy, and if that's the case where you are, I'm so sorry. Everyone should be able to have gravy with their chips. Chippy chips. Anyway, that's enough of my random burblings for today, I think. I hope that between now and the next time you hear my voice, you get to have some really, really, really unhealthy and lovely, comforting food from your favourite establishment, whether it's a chippy or some kind of takeaway. You know, sometimes you just need that. You just need it. And I hope that when you need it, you're able to have it. Take care, my lovelies. Bye. You've just listened to an episode of Tea and Sanctuary. If you enjoyed the show and would like to be an absolute bless poppet, you can help to keep the teapot full and the podcast ad-free by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Emma Newman. If you'd just like to buy me a nice cup of tea, go to ko-fi.com/Emma Newman. This episode was brought to you by 5 cups of tea, a blueberry muffin, and sweet nothings whispered into the ear of the local owl. Go forth, my pumpkins, and be lovely to each other.